Good day and welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I am here at the News Forum where all voices matter. It's great to have returning guest Rick Perkins with us. Rick served as a Nova Scotia Member of Parliament and as the Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology for the Conservative Party. Welcome back to Boom and Bust.
It's great to be here, Tony.
Good to have you. First of all, wanted to get your take. I know you're doing a lot of economic work in terms of advice and review of the economic situation in Canada, amongst other things. Just give us your assessment of where the country is economically right now.
Well, obviously, the two hot economic issues are the cost of living and the issues with regard to trade in the United States. The cost of living issue, the government seems to think the best way to go about doing things is sending people a check, 12 million people, which is quite an admission of failure to help buy groceries. And we have 2.2 million people going to food banks. But the core cause of that is that we've had this massive stagnation of our economy over the last 11 years in particular. When you compare us to our most important trading partner, the United States, the gap has widened considerably since 2015 on what's called GDP per capita. Why is that important? It's just basically how much are we producing, the value of that dollar versus our competitors. And the gap has widened every year to the point where it's more than about $12,000, $13,000 of income the average American makes compared to Canadians. And what that does is inflation goes up and the cost of everything goes up. And our buying power from what you earn is basically flat over the last 11 years. So one of the primary thing that's causing this cost of living crisis is the fact that our productivity, our salaries, what we produce in our economy is not growing.
Yeah, and it's not only in comparison to the United States, even some of our other major trading partners. I noticed Pierre Poilievre did a video recently talking about Ireland, and Canada had a lot of Irish immigration to this country over a century because the economic potential of Canada was far better than the economic potential of Ireland. Now it's the exact reverse. Our GDP per capita is one half of what the Irish have. Is that right?
It's true. Europe is not really a part of the world that you'd say, wow, that's an economy that's really banging on all cylinders. And yet there are countries in Europe that are performing much better than Canada, which is quite an indictment of the policies. And this hasn't happened because somehow we're not working harder. Our folks are working harder, if not harder than they ever have. It's through government policies, both through taxation, but policies that have driven capital investment out of this country. Bills like, I know we call it the No Pipelines Bill, but really it's the No Capital Bill, right? It's the creation of the Impact Assessment Act that was put in place by the Trudeau government that Carney has left in place that makes it 8 to 15 years, for example, to approve a mine. And capital just won't come here to go through that process. So as money stops investing, we've had over $1 trillion net money flow out of Canada into the United States over the last decade. We are losing that business investment. We lose that business investment. We lose the jobs and the opportunity and the creativity and the wealth that comes with that. Because, of course, wealth is created. Wealth and advancement is created by individuals working for themselves, creating things, but also working for companies. It isn't government that creates wealth. Governments actually stop wealth. If government continues to get bigger and take a bigger and bigger chunk of the economy, which we do through taxes, where we're one of the highest tax jurisdictions in the Western world, it pulls money out of the productive economy and contributes to this problem. And, that's why people are saying, I can't afford to buy meat anymore. That we've got 15,000 Canadians that came out this week actually on GoFundMe campaigns to pay for bare essentials, right? When you've got 1 in 10 people in Toronto using a food bank, that's a major issue in our richest city in the country.
Right, right. No, Rick, you make some good points. We're going to take a brief break. However, we have to pay our own piper here at the news forum, so we will have some commercials. We'll be back with our guest after these messages. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Rick Perkins. He was the Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology for the Conservative Party, former Member of Parliament in Nova Scotia as well. Rick, I wanted to get your assessment because I know that you, obviously being from Nova Scotia as well, you've got that connection with the eastern seaboard states of the United States as well. But we've got this huge trade issue with the U.S., the tariffs, and now the upcoming negotiations on the CUSMA agreement. Love to get your perspective on any of that.
Well, I serve currently as well for the Leader of the Opposition as co-chair of his Economic Growth Council. And what that is last year we put together a council of 40 CEOs from across this country. So this past winter, I actually traveled to 22 cities, had meetings with over 180 CEOs individually to talk about the productivity issues we just talked about. But
Right.
obviously, you couldn't have those conversations without the US relationship coming up and the current state of negotiations and the frustration that business have that the government doesn't appear to be engaging in serious conversations with the United States. No matter what you think of President Trump, our economy is and will always be tied to the United States. There isn't a country in the world that wouldn't change for our geography to have this access, to have this wealth of resources, to have the most direct access. And thanks to the conservative governments of the past, in particular Brian Mulroney's government, 85% of our goods do go duty and tariff free into the US. Nothing that liberals have done. That was done by conservative governments. And
Right.
so what they raise is the concern that these things aren't going on while Mexico is. And uh, presidents and prime ministers come and go, but we'll always be here in the geography. And they're the largest consumer market in the world, the largest consumer market that we've ever known. For us not to take advantage of that, whether it's through the shipping of our natural resources or by selling them products that we produce, is probably the most foolish policy. And even if you doubled, as Prime Minister Carney has said, trade with the rest of the world is his goal in the next 10 years, that's just a small fraction of what we trade with the United States. So, what we have to do is engage in these conversations. Pierre Poilievre has put out on one of the areas that the Prime Minister has not seemed to care very much about on the auto industry. We've put out a policy on that that came out of the work of the Economic Council advising him. Autos employ in that industry employ 500,000 people directly in Canada, and yet the current government won't engage
Mm.
on that, on softwood lumber, or on steel. They seem more content to do bailout programs than they are to actually get a deal. And we believe there is a deal available for every
Hmm. Hmm.
car that is sold in Canada. You get to bring one in duty free if you make a car here. So it's a very simple concept. In fact, the US ambassador has been intrigued by it. It would raise us back up to 2 million. We're only making 1 million vehicles now. And
Hmm.
it would actually add 2.5 million a year to the US manufacturing of automobiles. 90% of what we produce in automobiles goes to the US. We don't export hardly a single vehicle to any other market and are unlikely to. So this is an example, Tony, of what we need to do in developing this relationship seriously and addressing their concerns. And we also have concerns that we should have addressed in
Sure.
terms of the way the US approaches some of their industries, some of their subsidies, and some of their trade barriers.
That's an intriguing policy on the auto sector, very different from what the doom and gloom that sometimes is preached. I mean, do you really think that Prime Minister Carney wants a deal? It seems to be he's fairly lackadaisical on this point.
Well, this is just my own personal opinion,
Yeah, yeah.
but I don't think he does.
Mm.
I don't think he does. I think the prime minister, any deal that he would get with President Trump, believes it would be diminished versus the deal that Brian Mulroney got for us. And so the 15% of the economy that's being attacked, auto, steel, and lumber, I believe he's willing to run on a managed decline of those industries into the ground in order to protect the 85%. And so I think they're just ragging the puck, to use our hockey terms. Like they're just filling in time. I think they're hoping for a change in the House of Representatives in the fall in November with the elections, and that somehow that will distract President Trump, and they'll try and wait him out. Well, you know, the workers in auto, steel, and aluminum, which is 2 million jobs in this country, they should not be dismissed and used as a tool to wait out President Trump and have their industries decline into nothing because the prime minister is
Right.
not willing to go and do his job.
Sure. Listen, Rick, we're going to take another brief break. We'll be back on some other issues after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. It's great to have former Member of Parliament Rick Perkins back on the program. He was Shadow Minister for Innovation, Science and Technology for the Conservative Party. Rick, I know another matter that you've been monitoring very closely. There's a whole series of bills in various stages of passage in the House of Commons relating to internet regulation, also, in terms of enforcement mechanisms for bad guys on the internet, that kind of thing, and also huge impacts and privacy concerns. So I'd love for you to take our audience through a little bit of that and what your take on it is.
Yeah, there's 4 bills, one of which has passed this week, that the Liberals have introduced in the last 100 days that are surveillance, I'll call them surveillance and censorship bills. It began with Bill C9, which basically gives the government the right to monitor or call certain things a hate speech. It's a hate speech bill. Seems like a reasonable thing, right? Limit hate speech, although we do have criminal laws on hate speech already. But that bill actually would result in certain types of religious texts from various religions, Christian, Muslim, other things, could classify those texts as hate speech and charge a preacher, a priest, somebody is preaching in a synagogue or in a temple, using words from their scriptures, their holy texts as hate speech. So that was the start of it, but it's really gotten bad in the last week and a half. There's a couple of bills, one which is in discussion now, C22. They're called as you know, Tony, everything's got a number in
That's
Ottawa.
right.
So
Yeah.
C22, C34, and C36. So C32, people may have read about. There's been a lot about it in the paper. This is the one that says basically encryption and metadata, the little tags on everything you do on the internet, need to basically be accessible to the police. Now, they are accessible to the police currently if you go get a court order.
Right.
This bill says they don't need it. They just need reasonable grounds. They don't have to prove to a court. They can just go and seek directly from the service providers access to your data without a warrant. Seems very anti-democratic, but it's in a lot of ways it's worse than that, because it also says that those services like Signal and WhatsApp, which are encrypted chat vehicles that people use, kids, most people use them reasonably. Most members of parliament use Signal. The service provider can't even see what it is you're doing, but through a request, the police will be able to ask not only who you're talking to, how much time you're talking to, but they will be able to use that to go get a warrant if they think there's something up to get at your text. But they will actually be able to find out who you're talking to and for how long without a warrant, without court authorization on those things. And some of those companies have said they're going to stop producing the service. You pile on top of that C34, which was brought in, which is this bill that says that, parents are concerned about their kids online under 16. We get that. But they've brought in a bill, and we're studying the bill, but they've brought in a bill that says they're going to ban that. Now, this has been tried in Australia, and 70% of kids have gotten around it. It's very easy to get around. All you need is an IP address from a country that isn't banning kids from being under that. And you can Google that, and as you're a 10-year-old, you can find that in 10 minutes. In fact, a friend's kid of mine, a friend, has already done that. He's already said, oh, well, this is coming in, so he's going to go get an IP address in the US and avoid being detected. So it's a bit of whack-a-mole stuff. And then in doing that and enforcing that, they've created something called the Digital Safety Commission, a sort of CRTC of censorship and power over the internet and everything we do. And they tabled this week their third attempt at revising Canada's Privacy Act, which needs revision. The first part of it has some good stuff in it. In fact, it has a lot of the amendments I proposed to their bill last time have actually been incorporated in the first part of the bill. The problem is the second part of the bill strips out all the power of the privacy commissioner, who, as you know, Tony, is an officer of parliament,
Right.
not of the government. It takes his responsibility or her responsibility for the private sector privacy enforcement
Right.
out of their hands and puts it in this new mega
Rick, this is
CRT
this
Digital Safety Commission.
yeah, and this is an important point. Let's jump on that. We do have one final segment with you, so let's not lose this point. We'll be back after these messages. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having my conversation with Rick Perkins, former member of parliament from Nova Scotia, shadow minister for innovation, science, and technology for the Conservative Party. And Rick, we were just having this intense conversation about these four new bills on internet surveillance, as you called it. And there's a new digital commission. So you were just getting into what this does, and it probably has a new mandate. The privacy commissioner is there to protect privacy, but it doesn't sound like the digital commission has the same mandate. Is that right?
Well, what they're creating is this CRTC for uh, the digital space, for monitoring what you say, policing what you say, with regulatory making power. So it's not the government itself, not the governor and council, as called, cabinet, that will make the regulations. It's this body, like the CRTC. And you know how effective the CRTC has become and what a bureaucracy and organization it is, and how it has stilted competition in many sectors of our economy. Well, now they're going to have this appointed, cabinet appointed, not reporting to Parliament, this cabinet appointed Digital Safety Commission that's going to monitor what you say, is going to have to collect your ID in order to enforce the underage 16 ban. They're going to have to ask for everybody's ID so you have access, which means these companies will all have access. That commission will be able to ask without court orders or anything for any information from these technology companies about what you're doing. And they will be now responsible for enforcing privacy law as well, not the privacy commissioner who was an officer of parliament. That neutrality is important. So this mega bureaucracy to oversee the surveillance of everything digital and everything with regard to private sector privacy and how companies use your information is being created by the government in an agency that's appointed with 5 commissioners appointed by the cabinet. That's a powerful body to oversee the censorship of and enforcement of all these laws.
So I'm kind of surprised because these kinds of things have been happening in the UK, in other countries, US, and there's always been a big reaction from the public who want their privacy to be protected, not infringed by state actors. So are you getting the sense that Canadians are upset about this or not?
Well, on Bill C-36, the new
Right.
Privacy Act proposal, it was only tabled this week, so all the experts are just starting to write about it. They won't be debating this bill till the fall in Parliament. So I'm not surprised that there's not a lot of awareness of that. C-34 was introduced last week. So again, it hasn't really received parliamentary scrutiny, but at a great length, but it's received some, or a couple of weeks ago, I should say. So they have had some hearings on it, and the companies have raised these flags. So we'll see how the government responds. But I think it's all coached in this protecting of children
Right.
sort of umbrella, which is hard for people to oppose. Who doesn't want to protect children from the harms of what goes on the internet? And wouldn't all parents like to blame the law and the government for not allowing their kids on the internet than rather to have to police it themselves? But the reality is this power of censorship applies to you and me, not just to kids.
Right.
And I don't think that's been uh, brought to people's attention. Hopefully, over the summer and the fall, as these bills progress, there will be more attention and more objection to this overreaching, really obscene censorship and surveillance power that the government's looking for.
Yeah, and of course, they're trying to suggest that this is necessary for national security or for personal security, but there are other ways to do that, right?
Yeah, in the House this week, some of the Liberal MPs were saying, you guys, sort of in paraphrasing Vic Taves, I won't paraphrase what he said, but or say what he said way back when in the Harper government, but
Right,
paraphrasing that, saying, look, you guys must be opposed to the police and supporting the police because the police want these powers. Well, of
right.
course, the police will always want powers to go get your information without
Sure.
going to court. I mean, in a democracy, we have to have checks and balances against
That's
these
true.
very various branches of governments. And you can't have unfettered police control. That's why there's a check and balance of
Right,
going to the
right,
court to receive this kind of
right.
permission. And you would know that as a lawyer, Tony.
Yeah, no, I do, I do. Hey, listen, Rick, we're out of time, unfortunately. It's gone by quickly, but thanks for coming back on the program and good luck with your oversight of these matters.
Anytime, my friend.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.